Before we begin, let me say a few words. The topic of your book is so comprehensive and covers, literally, all aspects of global control by the Jesuits, dating back to 1540. I would like to begin our conversation with a very important point of clarification, so that our readers have something to hold on to, while reading the historical narrative we are about to present. Let me also add that your book is one of the most compelling, dynamic, genuinely educational historical documents I have ever read. I want to tell you, I am impressed. You, literally, link every major global conflict and political assassination to the hands of the Jesuit order. The Jews, as with many other groups you mention, have been the unwitting pawns in this Jesuit agenda. Today, the present. I am going to start here, and then we're going to go way back in time and work our way up. But, I want to start here, because it will give a foundation for going back in time. Peter Hans Kelvenbach, front, center, 29th Superior General, with his cosmopolitan general staff. From the book Jesuits, a multi-biography by Jean Lacouture, French copyright 1991. English copyright 1995. Counterpoint Books, P.O. Box 65793, Washington, District of Columbia 20035. ISBN 1-887178-05-. Today, who is the Superior General of the Jesuits, the so-called Black Pope? Black here refers to hidden, evil activities, not to race or color. Who gives the orders to the actual Pope? Is it still Jean-Baptiste Janssens? Phelps, Janssens, Frenchman. No, he passed away in 1964. Then Pedro Arup came to power. Then, after Arup died, in 1988, I believe, the present Jesuit general is Count Hans Kelvenbach. See photo nearby. I call him Count Hans Kelvenhof. Martin, let us discuss this position of general. And, in addition, who is this person, Count Hans Kelvenbach? Who does he serve? What are his origins? Where does he hail from? Phelps, the present general, is a Dutchman, his nationality is Dutch. Martin, where is he? Physically, where is he? Phelps, he resides in Rome, at the headquarters of the Jesuits, called the Church of Jesus. So, the Jesuit general resides in Rome at, what I just called, the Jesuit headquarters. Martin, the Church of Jesus, is that near the Vatican? Phelps, it is not far from the Vatican, right? It is in the same general area. It is headquarters of the Knights of Malta. Martin, is it part of Vatican City, proper? Phelps, right, I believe, yes it is. Martin, where does Satan fit into this picture, and what is the ultimate goal of the Jesuits, the so-called Society of Jesus? Phelps, the Jesuit general, and the other high Jesuit generals, they are sorcerers. They are Luciferians, and they worship what they would call Lucifer. They do not believe in Satan. They believe in Lucifer. Now, according to Alberto Rivera, he was invited because he was a top Jesuit at the time. In the late 60s he was invited to a Black Mass in Spain where there were quite a few top Jesuit generals present. And he called it a Black Mass. Well, when you re-involved in a Black Mass, you re-involved in the worship of Lucifer, all dressed in their black capes and so on. Martin, I am fascinated by Count Hans Kelvenbach, because nobody in the world knows who this person is. I've never heard the name. Phelps, let me just tell you, that you can see his picture and his top Jesuits. Just a second and I'll get the book. The name of the book is called Jesuits, a multi-biography, by Jean Lacouture, and that is available, usually, in the bookstores. It was published in 1995. Jean Lacouture is a Frenchman. He was a communist, is a communist. On the last page of the pictures in it, that is right adjacent to page 343, You see Peter Hans Kelvenbach. He is the Jesuit general, and he looks like just a very evil individual. There's a black man, who is a high Jesuit. He is a 29 superior Jesuit with his cosmopolitan general staff. One of the general staff looks like Ben Kingsley of Schindler's List. There are 6 white men, and 1 black man. And that is his general staff. Martin, what is the process of choosing a successor general? Phelps, the high Jesuits elect him, and he is elected for life, unless he becomes a heretic. Martin, and the so-called high Jesuits represent what group? Phelps, I would say that they profess the high 4th degree. When a Jesuit is professed, he is under the Jesuit oath, he is under the bloody oath that I have in my book. Martin, do we have permission to reprint that oath were in our paper? Phelps, of course, absolutely. Martin, one of my questions has to do with the oath and its similarity to the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, and I wrote that question before I got back to the protocols portion of your book. Phelps, the Jesuits obviously wrote the protocols, because they have carried out every protocol in that little handbook. They have carried everything out. And Alberto Rivera says and he was a Jesuit, he was greatly maligned, not helped at all by the apostate Protestants and Baptists in this country. He was helped, somewhat, by Jack Chick. Jack Chick published his story in 6 volumes, titled Alberto I, II, III, IV, V, and Vi. Alberto Rivera says that it was Jews aligned with the Pope who published the protocols. Well, I tend to feel that it was just the Jesuits themselves because they, and they alone, were the ones who were able to bring this to pass. They were the ones in the government. They were the ones behind professional sports. The owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers is a Knight of Malta. The owner of the Detroit Lions is a Knight of Malta. All your top owners of these ball clubs, for the most part, are Knights of Malta, getting the people whooped up in this hoopla over games and sports, while they were busy creating a tyranny. So, that was one of the things in the protocols, that they would create amusements. Another one they used was Walt Disney, 33rd degree Freemason. Disney World, Disneyland. Another one was Milton Hershey, with Hershey Park. They create all of these amusements and games and pastimes, to get the people drunk with pleasure, while they were busy overthrowing the Protestant form of government. Martin, where does Las Vegas factor into all of this? Phelps, Las Vegas, well, for the most part, is controlled by the mafia. But all the high mafia families are Roman Catholic, and they are all subordinate to the Pope or to the Cardinal of New York, which is Cardinal O'Connor because the Mafia Commission resides in New York. Frank Costello was a member of the Mob Commission, and he was intimate, personal friends with Knight of Malta, Hollywood mogul, Joe Kennedy. And that has not changed. So, the High Knights are good, dear brothers with the High Mafia Dons, the Gambinos, the Lucchese, the Colombos, all of them. And they control Hollywood, not the Jews. It is only Jews, who are front men, who are involved in Hollywood and working for the Mafia and for the Cardinal, just like in politics it would be Arlen Specter. Arlen Specter was Spelly as Cardinal Spellman as Jew in the assassination of President Kennedy, and he would never say a word about it. Martin, now, as we go through here, if there is anything that you don't want me to print, please let me know because, literally, I am going to print everything we say in this conversation. Phelps, that's fine with me because it needs to be said. Martin, let us get back to Count Hans Kelvenbach. I want to shine the spotlight on this guy for just a little bit here. Let us talk about him. What does he do? Who is he? Let us talk about his position as general. How do they exercise this control over the Pope? Does the Pope know he is a pawn? Phelps, okay, one question at a time. So, which question do you want me to deal with? Martin, Let us just shine the light right on the Count Phelps, the Jesuit general, okay? Martin, let us start there, and you tell me everything you want to tell me about that position. Phelps, the Jesuit general, is the absolute, complete, and total dictator and autocrat of the order. When he speaks, his provincials move. The provincials are his major subordinates. There are around 83 provincials right now. As I understand it, the Jesuit order has divided the world into 83 regions. Okay? For each region, there is a Jesuit provincial. There are 10 provincials in the United States. There is one for Central America. There is one for Ireland. They've divided up the world into these provinces. So it is old Babylonian provincial government, centered in Nebuchadnezzar or the Jesuit general himself, so it is strictly a Roman form of government, where all the states or provinces are subordinate to this worldwide sovereign. The Jesuit general exercises full and complete power over the order. He meets with his provincials. When they decide to start a war or an agitation, he gets the information from the provincial of that country, how best to go about this, the demeanor of the people, and then he uses legitimate grievances to foment an agitation like the 1964 civil rights movement. That was all a Jesuit agitation, completely, because the end result was more consolidation of power in Washington with the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that was written by the longtime president of the University of Notre Dame, the Reverend Theodore Hesburgh. The Jesuit general rules the world through his provincials. And the provincials then, of course, rule the lower Jesuits, and there are many Jesuits who are not professed, so many of the lower Jesuits have no idea what is going on at the top. They have no concept of the power of their order. It is just like Freemasonry. The lower Freemasons have no idea that the high Shriner Freemasons are working for the Jesuit general. They think that they read just doing works and being good people. But the bottom line is that the high-level Freemasons are subject, also, to the Jesuit general because the Jesuit general, with Frederick the Great, wrote the high degrees, the last 8 degrees, of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, when Frederick protected them, when they were suppressed by the Pope in 1773. So, you have the alignment with the Jesuit order and the most powerful Freemason they had in the craft, Frederick the Great, during their suppression. That is an irrefutable conclusion. And then, when you see the Napoleonic Wars, the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars carried out by Freemasonry, everything Napoleon did, and the Jacobins, whatever they did, completely benefited the Jesuit order. It is to this end that Alexander Dumas wrote his The Count of Monte Cristo. The Count is the Jesuit general. Monte Mount, Cristo Christ. The Count of the Mount of Christ. Alexander Dumas was talking about the Jesuit general getting vengeance when the Jesuits were suppressed, and many of them were consigned to an island, 3 hours sailing west, off the coast of Portugal. And so, when the Jesuits finally regained their power, they punished all of the monarchs of Europe who had suppressed them, drove them from their thrones, including the Knights of Malta from Malta, using Napoleon. And Alexander Dumas, who fought for the Italian patriots in 1848, to free Rome from the temporal power of the Pope, wrote many books, and one of the books was to expose this, and that was The Count of Monte Cristo. So, when you read that book, bear in mind that it is really a satire on the Jesuit order regaining their power in France. The Count of Monte Cristo has an intelligence apparatus that can't be beat. Well, that's the Jesuit order. But the Count doesn't get what he really ought to have, or his last wish, and that is the love of woman. He gains back all of his political power, he gains back everything he lost, but he doesn't have the love of a woman. And that is the Jesuit order. They have no women. They have no love of a woman. Because to have a wife, to have a woman, means you have an allegiance to your wife and family, and you cannot obey the general. That's why they will never be married, and that is one of the great keys to their success. They can betray a nation and walk away. They can betray all the Irish Catholics getting on the Titanic, and walk away. They can betray us in Vietnam and walk away. They can betray us every time we go to the hospital, and get radiated and cut and drugged, and walk away, because it's for the greater glory of God? Ad majorem Dei gloriam, the greater glory of the God who sits in Rome. Martin, what is the ultimate goal of the Jesuits? Phelps, their ultimate goal is the rule of the world, with the Pope of their making, from Solomon's rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. That's their ultimate goal. Martin, and why is Solomon's temple rebuilt so important? Phelps, because the Jesuits have always wanted that. When Ignatius Loyola first started the order, one of the first things he did was, he wanted to go to Jerusalem and set up the Jesuit headquarters there. So, he went there, he tried to do it and failed, came back, went to school, started his Latin studies, etc. Maybe it might be a good idea to just review a little bit about Ignatius Loyola. Martin, yes. Phelps, okay, Ignatius Loyola was a Spanish soldier, and he was wounded at a battle between the French and the Spanish, and his leg was shattered. Well, the French general, because Loyola was very brave in conflict, ordered his own doctors to attend Loyola. So they set the leg, and sent him back to his home which, of course, he was royalty to the Council of Loyola in Spain, in the area of the Basques. Loyola, through his series of desiring to regain his leg, it had healed improperly, so he made a rack, where he would stretch the leg, with severe, horrible, awful pain, and trying to stretch this leg, to get it back to normal shape, he endured awful, terrible pain. He had it broken, again, a couple of times, and it still did not heal properly, so he had a perpetual limp. He could no longer be the courtier among women, and as a result, he went into this depression, and he then had this vision of the saints, etc., etc., and he wrote his spiritual exercises. I will stop at the spiritual exercises, just for a minute, but I'll take up from there. Loyola then wanted to form an army, but when this happened with his spiritual exercises, those spiritual exercises would be basic training for all of his Jesuits. That's what they will all go through. That's what every Jesuit goes through today. One of the maxims of the spiritual exercises is, that if my superior says black is white and white is black, then that's the way it is. That is in his spiritual exercises. That is what is quoted in JFK, when Kevin Costner is telling his people, "Hey, people, we've got to start thinking like the sea, black is white and white is black." That was a Jesuit giveaway that the Jesuits produced that movie, because they re-quoting Ignatius Loyola in that movie from his spiritual exercises. So, Loyola had an indomitable will. He had a will of steel, and he set his mind to regain back what the papacy had lost to the Reformation. And so, he went to the Pope, and the Pope in 1540 then created the Jesuit order. But this man is a soldier, he is a lawyer, and he put together a legion of soldiers and warriors, to get back what Rome had lost, as well as institute a world's government for the Pope, from Jerusalem. This was in 1540. He started the order in 1536. He was arrested by the Inquisition, and he was released, and he went to the Pope. He threw himself at the feet of the Pope. He would be completely at his service. The Pope chartered him, and that Pope was Pius III. The Pope chartered them, created the Jesuit order. Now he has papal protection, and they began their awful history of deeds of blood. And war after war after war after war, they all attributed to the Jesuit order in some way. Catholic nobles, with lots of money, donated castles and schools and money to the Jesuit order. Virtually everything they own has been given to them or stolen by them. Of course, they stole all of the fortunes of the Jews in World War II. They stole all their gold, all their assets and everything, whenever they went into a country. What has just been released is nothing compared to what they've taken. In Edmund Paris's book, printed by Ozark Publications, called The Vatican Against Europe, it gets into great detail of what they did. It calls it the last 30 years of war is all attributable to the Jesuits, their massacres of the Serbs and Jews, etc. But Edmund Paris did not understand that the Jesuit general, and this is one of the most important points I want to make about von Kulvenbach, the Jesuit general is in complete control of the international intelligence community, that is the CIA, the FBI, KGB, the Israeli Mossad, the German BND, the British SIS. The Jesuit general is in complete control of the entire intelligence apparatus. FBI, every bureaucratic agency in this country, all of it, he is in complete control of it. So, whenever he wants to find something out about an individual, they put in the social security number, and everything from all of the intelligence apparatus kicks in, and he and his provincials can review everything about that man. Credit cards, you name it, everything that is attached to Rome's social security number, which FDR put upon us in 1933 with the help of Spellman. At the time, I believe he was Archbishop, or maybe it was Cardinal Hayes, but Rome was behind FDR in putting him in office. The couple of things that he did was implement social insecurity, the income tax, and recognizing Joseph Stalin's bloody Jesuit USSR government. So, with the giving of us the social security number, that is Rome's number, that's why I refuse to use it, and that's why they want everybody using it for everything, driver's license, tax return, credit card, everything you do, that number is you and that number is Rome's number. Martin, let me just back up here for a minute. What comes to mind is Louis Freeh, head of the FBI. Phelps, Roman Catholic, good altar boy. Probably a Knight of Columbus, I can prove it. But anybody with that kind of power has got to be a Knight of Columbus. And the Knights of Columbus implement Jesuit politics. And Louis Freeh was the one behind the Waco atrocity and the Oklahoma City bombing atrocity. And his top sniper was a Japanese Roman Catholic named Lon Horiuchi. So, it's Roman Catholics in control, Knights in control of the FBI, who carried out all of this killing. And those two men, Louis Freeh and Lon Horiuchi, are personally accountable to Cardinal O'Connor of New York. And Cardinal O'Connor of New York is the most powerful cardinal in the country. He is the military vicar. And that's why Bush kissed his fanny for going to Bob Jones, because Cardinal O'Connor is the king of the American Empire. And he rules his empire from that palace, St. Patrick's Cathedral, the Little Vatican. Martin, and is he in contact, do you think, with Kulvenbach? Phelps, of course. O'Connor himself is not a Jesuit, but the Jesuits are like the SS of the Catholic Church. They maintain order. And the ones closest to him who maintain order are the Jesuits of Fordham University. Now, one of them, the head of Fordham University, I believe he is an Irishman, is also a member of the CFR Council on Foreign Relations. And I have that right here in the annual report of the CFR of 1993. Those Jesuits at Fordham maintain semblance and rule over the Cardinal in New York. And, of course, the powerful Jesuits of Fordham include Avery Dulles and John Foster Dulles, one of the writers of the book on the Second Vatican Council. Martin, let us back up now, let us go back. What is the Council of Trent? Phelps, the Council of Trent was the response of Rome to the Protestant Reformation. Remember, the Protestant Reformation brought us all of the political liberty that we know of today. There's no such thing as national sovereignty without the Reformation. There's no such thing as private rights without the Reformation. There's no such thing as the law of nations, as we know of it today, of Montesquieu and the others, without the Reformation. So, when the Reformation came with their doctrines of salvation by grace through faith alone, and that there was no need for the priesthood to go to heaven, that all we need is salvation in Christ, and Romans 1:17, the righteous shall live by faith. When the Reformation came, it completely stripped Rome of its spiritual power. The priests were no longer wanted, because the people were getting the Word of God in a Bible, specifically in Holland, England, and Germany. And so, with these great revivals breaking forth and the Reformation happening, nations were breaking away from the power of the Pope. The Holy Roman Empire was breaking up. Charles V, the emperor, resigned and became a monk and a gardener. So, the Lord was moving mightily in breaking the power of the Holy Roman Empire, started by Charlemagne and the Pope. Well, this was not good for Rome, because they were losing lots of money. The nations were not paying Peter's pence anymore, which today we call foreign aid, in this country. And so the Pope was very upset about his. What is he going to do? These nations are breaking away from us, they reign not under our temporal or spiritual power, and it is very important to remember that the Pope claims two powers, spiritual and temporal, and with the breaking of his spiritual power, he then lost his temporal power. In other words, he no longer had the ability to rule the people through the king of the country, because the king was breaking away, like Henry VIII. So, Henry VIII broke away from the Roman Church, and formed the Church of England. He no longer was subject to the Pope. This was happening in England, in Germany, in Holland, and other places. As a result of this, the devil raised up Ignatius Loyola with his demonisms, his spiritual exercises. And because Loyola had been a member of the Spanish Alumbrados, which is what we call the Illuminati today, and he used the Jesuit order to attempt to regain back what had been taken by the Reformation, what the Lord had done through Luther, Calvin, and Knox. And, by the way, Luther, Calvin, and Knox, none of those men died violent deaths. They all lived to older age and died peacefully, amidst the power of the Jesuit machinations. The Council of Trent consists of 25 sessions. Those 25 sessions accuse and condemn all the doctrines of the Reformation. It condemns anybody who does not believe that the literal Jesus Christ is in the host Holy Communion bread, and that his literal blood is in the wine. That is called transubstantiation. Anybody who does not believe that is an accursed anathema. Anybody who believes that their salvation is outside the Catholic Church is accursed anathema. Anybody who believes in justification by grace through faith, anathema, accursed. Anybody who believes that the Pope is not the vicar of Christ, accursed, anathema. You see, all of these doctrines were being put forth as a result of reading the Bible, which produced the Reformation, and so the Jesuits accursed everything that the Reformers were preaching. This is all in law called the Council of Trent. In the fourth session, which is probably the most important session, the Jesuits condemn freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of conscience. So, no man has the right to choose his own religion, no man has the right to publish what he feels is the truth, and no man has the right to freedom of conscience. Those rights were secured by our Baptist Calvinist forefathers in the First Amendment. The man who wrote the First Amendment was James Madison, who was a Baptist Calvinist, and he was told by that Baptist Calvinist in Virginia, Doc. John Leland, if you don't secure all those rights, Virginia will not ratify the Constitution. Virginia was a Baptist Calvinist state. So, we have a warfare between the Council of Trent and the doctrines of the Reformation, particularly as outlined by John Calvin in his Institutes of the Christian Religion. Calvin 1536 wrote the Institutes of the Christian Religion. He finished it when he was 27, and he dedicated it to the King of France. And because the Jesuits so hated him, he was driven from France and he resided in Geneva to the day of his death, when he became governor of Geneva. It is Calvin and his Institutes of the Christian Religion versus Loyola and his Council of Trent, if you want it sewed up in two major documents. Martin, Council of Trent was what year? Phelps, from 1545-1563, 18 years. And Trent is a little town in Italy. So, it was a council that took place in the town of Trent, Italy. The Presbyterian Westminster Confession and Faith, that was finished in 1648, after the 30 Years' War, is another extension of Calvin's Institutes, and is what the Church of Scotland and the Covenanters went by when they resisted the powers of Rome and England. That document is a major document, and it is not the New Westminster Confession, it is the old one of 1648, where they called the Pope the man of sin, that Roman Antichrist, and they also denounced anti-Christian tyranny. And that it is their duty to use what they call the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God, which we read in Ephesians, chapter 6, and the sword of just defense, the gun, the sword. So, us Calvinists believe that there is a time for peace and a time for war, and we do not refuse to go to the battlefield when it is necessary. It was the Calvinists who gave us our political liberty in England with Cromwell. He was a Calvinist and an independent Baptist. It was Calvinists in Holland who gave the Dutch their political liberty, with William of Orange, and later his son, Prince Maurice, and then later, in our great country, when it was Washington, the Freemason who did not go into that Masonic lodge, that last 30 years of his life in his own words, who was a Baptist and a Calvinist. He was baptized in the First Baptist Church of New York by one of his captains, Pastor Gano, all surrounded by Calvinists. That's why they didn't surrender at Valley Forge. That's why, when they were naked, when they went through the snow, barefoot, they endured that because they were Bible-believing Calvinists and they refused to submit to the tyranny of King George, who was controlled by the Jesuits. And that is the soul of our country. If we lose that soul, we've lost everything. And those very same Baptists, in the Second Amendment, secured their right to bear arms, because they secured the right, the sword of just defense. And the sword of the Spirit is contained in the First Amendment, the right to have the Bible never taken from them. The two swords of Calvinism are secured in the First and Second Amendments. Without those first two amendments, all the others are nothing. Martin, well, I got to my question number 2. So, let us go to number 3 of the 70. Laughter. How does Shriner Freemason President Harry Truman signing into law of the Emergency War Powers Act of 1950 factor into the Jesuit agenda? Phelps. First of all, Harry Truman, who the Japanese called Dirty Harry. When they heard the movie Dirty Harry came out, they thought it was a movie about Harry Truman, according to my Japanese pastor friend, Daniel Fuji, who has passed away. Harry Truman was put in office by the Jesuits, the Panzer-gassed Democratic machine in Missouri. Harry Truman takes over after FDR's murder, because he was murdered in the home of Bernard Baruch. When he did that, he then finished up the war with a hoax called the dropping of the nuclear bombs, to purposely create this greater hoax called the Cold War, that would enable the Vatican to knock over country after country after country, and replace the leaders with dictators, subordinate to the Pope. That was the purpose of the Cold War. And so, when Harry Truman in 1950 signed into law the Emergency War Powers Act, the Cold War was in full force. They were building bomb shelters, etc. So the nation was in kind of a frenzy. When he signed this into law, it put the whole country under military or martial law, and that's when the flags in every courtroom, state and federal, began to be changed. And every state flag and every U.S. flag is now trimmed in gold fringe. And whenever you see a flag trimmed in gold fringe, that means that it is the flag of the Commander-in-Chief. Now, if it is the state flag, it means that it's the flag of the governor, as Commander-in-Chief. And if it is the federal flag, or the national flag, more correctly, it is the flag of the Commander-in-Chief in Washington. So, all your courts are nothing more than courts of military rule. They all proceed with summary procedures. The jury has no power of jury nullification. And they are simply enforcing the laws of the empire, which I call 14th Amendment America, which is a military-style, King of England-style country. The courts are nothing more than courts of the King's Bench, as you can see in Blackstone's commentaries. And the banks, as you walk into every bank, they all have a flag trimmed in gold fringe. The bank is what England would call, in Blackstone's day, the King's Bank. So, we have the King's Bank, and we have the King's Bench. And it is run according to military rule, according to Berkheimer's great work Military Rule and Martial Law, published in 1914. When Harry Truman did this, there was a consummation of a great plan, to put us under the Emergency War Powers Act and, actually, a war rule. Daylight savings time is what was called wartime. This country only went to daylight savings time during World War II, and they called it, at that time, wartime. So, nothing has changed. We've never gone back to not turning back our clocks. We're still on wartime. The income tax is a war tax. It was called the victory tax in 1942. So, people are paying a war tax, they re under wartime, they re under an Emergency War Powers Act, and the courts are war courts. Martin, regarding the assassination of President John Kennedy, which could take this entire interview, you say that the assassination was ordered by the Jesuit general, executed by Pope Paul V, and carried out by the American Pope, Francis Cardinal Spellman, who, in turn, used the Knights of Malta, Shriner Freemasons, Knights of Columbus, and Mafia Dons, including the FBI and CIA, to carry out the order from Rome. Would you explain why you believe your particular theory on the assassination to be an accurate representation of the facts? Phelps, sure. All right, number 1, the powers that be are properly outlined in his book, and proven through 2 centuries, of showing how it has all been put together. Now, as to why, I will be conservative and stick with Fletcher Prouty's reasons, that he outlined in his JFK, and also his other book called The Secret Team. The reason why Kennedy was assassinated was he wanted to end the Vietnam War, and he wanted to end the rule of the CIA. That begets 2 questions. Did Rome want the Vietnam War? And, did Rome control the CIA? The answer is yes on both counts. We know, on its face, that the Vietnam War was called Spellman's War? Cardinal Spellman's War. He went over to the war front many times and he called the American soldiers the soldiers of Christ. The man who was the commander of the American forces was a Roman Catholic, CFR member, possibly a Knight of Columbus, I don't know, but he was General William Westmoreland. So, Westmoreland was Cardinal Spellman's agent, to make sure that war was prosecuted properly. And another overseer of Westmoreland was Cardinal Spellman's boy, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Lyndon Baines Johnson was a 33rd-degree Freemason. He was also part of the assassination, with J. Edgar Hoover, another 33rd-degree Freemason. And Johnson went to Cardinal Spellman's death at St. Patrick's Cathedral, and the picture can be seen in Cooney's work The American Pope. So, Johnson was completely at the beck and call of Cardinal Spellman through Cartha Deloche, the third in control of the FBI. According to Kurt Gentry, in his Hoover, The Man and the Secrets, Deloche had a phone at his bedside direct to Johnson, and Johnson could call him anytime. Deloche was a Knight of Malta, subject to Spellman. Spellman wanted the Vietnam War. Why? Spellman was controlled by the Jesuits of Fordham. Why did the Jesuit general want the Vietnam War? The people of Vietnam, the Buddhists, were unconvertible. They would not convert to Catholicism. They didn't need Rome. There had been a Jesuit presence in Vietnam for centuries, so it had been decided that about 1 million or so Buddhists would have to be purged. They would later continue this purge of Cambodia, with Pol Pot, and the purge is yet for Thailand. It was a purging of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam of all these Buddhists, just like they purged the Buddhists of China with Mao Zedong, because Mao Zedong was completely controlled by the Jesuits. So, they wanted the Vietnam War. The other thing is that Rome is in control of the drug trade. The Vatican controls all of the drug trade, all of the heroin, all of the opium, all of the cocaine, everything going around in Colombia. Colombia has a concordat with the Pope. A concordat is a treaty with the Pope. Hitler had a concordat. Mussolini had a concordat. Franco had a concordat. They want to set up a concordat here, which was the reason for Reagan formally recognizing the sovereign state of Vatican City in 1984. The greatest traitor we ever had was Ronald Reagan. So, they had a concordat. Colombia has a concordat. Do you think that drugs running out of Colombia, with a country that has a concordat with Rome, is not controlled by Rome? If Rome didn't want the drug trade out of Colombia, they'd end the concordat. The whole drug trade is run by high mafia families out of the country of Colombia, subject to the Jesuit general. And the Jesuit general ran the opium trade, a couple of centuries ago, out of China. They ran the silk trade, the pearl trade. The movie Shogun is but a slight scratching of the surface of the Jesuit black ships that trafficked in all of the silk and pearls and gold and opals and everything they could pull out of the East, including opium. The Vietnam War was to consolidate and control this huge massive drug trade that would inundate every American city with drugs, being brought in by the CIA with their Air America, and then distributed by the trafficking family throughout the United States. Santos trafficking out of Miami. So we have the Mafia and the CIA working together in the drug trade. We have the Mafia and the CIA working together in the assassination of Kennedy. The first reason why the Jesuit general at that time, Jean-Baptiste Janssens, wanted Kennedy out of the way was because he was going to end the Vietnam War. The second reason is, he wanted to end the reign of the CIA, because the CIA had betrayed him in the person of McGeorge Bundy, by not giving the cover to the Cuban patriots, to retake Cuba from that Roman Catholic, Jesuit-trained, greaseball bastard. He was a bastard, his father was a Nazi. Fidel Castro. Kennedy was betrayed by the CIA at the Bay of Pigs invasion, which sacrificed all the patriots on the shores of the Bay of Pigs there, so Castro had no real opposition. This was the same tactic used by the CIA and the KGB at the top, working together with Angleton controlling it, in the Hungarian Revolution, when the CIA fomented that revolution, and then betrayed all of those patriots into the hands of the Soviet Army and KGB, which infuriated certain top CIA officials. It's the same tactic. You raise up a revolution and you sacrifice the men who truly want to resist. When that happened, when McGeorge Bundy stopped the air cover of the Bay of Pigs invasion, that ended that resistance to Castro and it enthroned him into power. And, of course, it was meant to be by the Jesuits, because they had trained him. So now Kennedy looks bad. He's got egg all over his face. What does he want to do? He signs a memorandum, according to Fletcher Prouty, and takes all of the power away from the CIA, and gives it to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The CIA was built by the Knights of Malta. One of the founders of the CIA was Wild Bill Donovan, an Irish Roman Catholic, who are the most fanatical, and his brother was a Dominican priest, Vincent. So, the CIA was founded by this high Roman Catholic, the first head, to solidify the Catholic or the Vatican control of it. I am not against the Catholic people, I am against Rome's hierarchy. The American Catholic people know nothing of what's going on. And if they did, there would be a march on St. Patrick's tomorrow morning. So, as I am against the hierarchy, I am showing that Kennedy was against the Vietnam War, and he was going to do away with the CIA. Well, the Jesuits had brought in all of their top Nazi SS soldiers into the CIA, because the Jesuits were using the SS to kill the Jews in Europe. When the Einsatzgruppen went into Russia, the Jesuits followed with the SS, and purged Western Russia of all its Jews. That's why Stalin deliberately killed 40,000 of his best officers. That's why he kicked out his best generals, purged them, because he wanted to make sure that the Red Army would lose with the advance of the German army, because following that would come the SS, and purge Russia of the Jews that Stalin so hated. And by the way, justice is often poetic, because Stalin's daughter married a Jew. Now, the CIA was composed of the SS. The CIA now was an arm and the intelligence arm of the Vatican. The Knights of Malta were throughout. Casey was a Knight of Malta. Angleton was a Knight of Malta. The Knights were through and through. Angleton manned the Vatican desk, and that is a desk within the CIA that has a direct link to the Vatican. So, Kennedy wanted to end this intelligence community. That was the end of him. Thus for anyone attempting to end the CIA, and attempting to end the Vietnam War, and also because he attacked the Jesuits, Federal Reserve Bank by printing United States notes, they got rid of him. They killed our only Roman Catholic president. And it is another piece of poetic justice that a Roman Catholic, not Protestants, like Harry Truman, FDR, and others, is a Roman Catholic, who truly sought to resist the temporal power of the Pope in this country. And in many ways, even though Kennedy was, in fact, a socialist and communist, at least he resisted the temporal power of the Pope. And for that we should be thankful and remember his name. But what have they done to his name? They've slandered it. They drag it into the dirt. Every time you see it on TV, they parade before you his womanizing, which I don't deny, but my goodness, can't we give him some credit where credit is due? That's why they got rid of John F. Kennedy. And then, of course, as soon as he is assassinated, John McCain, the head of the CIA, the following day goes to the White House and they reverse Kennedy's memorandum of reversing the Vietnam War and make a full-scale, carte blanche war. The CIA then is tremendously and heavily funded, because it was a CIA war. And there they tried all of their new technology, their anti-gravity machines, their men, who they were trying to make like the $1 Million Man. They tried out all their new technology in Vietnam. It was a great experimental theater, and Kennedy knew this. He knew it, and he knew that the American people had no idea what was going down, and he still tried to resist it, against his father's warnings. Because his father was the most powerful Knight of Malta in the empire. Martin, any theories on why they took out Jr. Phelps? Yes. According to Tom Kunkel, in his publication, John F. Kennedy, Jr. wanted to find his father's real killers, and he had the power to publish the conclusion. So, they took him out right away. They would not allow that to happen. Martin, why haven't you been taken out? Phelps, because I am immortal until the Lord is done with me. I am a Calvinist and a Baptist, and we believe in the sovereignty of God. And as long as we are operating in His will, they cannot touch us, regardless of their power. Martin, which is why we were having this conversation. Phelps, which is why we were having the conversation. Don't you think for one moment they were not tapping this phone? They know this. The issue is here. We were talking about a providential, sovereign God who wishes to move, using second causes, men, just as the devil does. The devil always uses second causes, men. So, it is one group of men versus another group of men, and one path leads to evil, and the true, Almighty God leads to goodness. The problem is, with us, there are very few men who want to believe God anymore. Nobody believes He can deliver anymore. It is just a handful of us who say, well, we are going to do His will, we are going to trust Him in His power. And like the Hebrews getting ready to be thrown into the fiery furnace of Nebuchadnezzar, our God is able to deliver us. We are going to tell the truth. Martin, let us see here. I can throw away a lot of these questions. So much of it seems, in a way, irrelevant to our current times, because there is so much going on now. But, good grief. I was just stunned to read in your book of all the historical things that have happened as a result of these evil people. You dedicated the book to 4 Roman Catholics who, I am sure, no one has ever heard of: Charles Chiniquy, Jeremiah Crowley, Emmett McLaughlin, and Alberto Rivera. Why them? Phelps, Because those Roman Catholic men were priests, they left the priesthood, and told the truth about what was really happening. And all four of them, except one, I think Emmett McLaughlin, paid with their life. Chiniquy was the great exposer of the Jesuit assassination of President Lincoln, when he wrote his masterpiece 50 Years in the Church of Rome in 1886. He proves that Lincoln was assassinated by the Jesuits, and that it was covered up by our government at the time. Jeremiah Crowley, that priest, was a great Irishman who came here and, seeing the corruption of the archdiocese in Chicago, that it was so corrupt, he left it and exposed it. And, of course, he later came to Christ and became a Bible believer, which they would call a Protestant. Protestants today don't believe the Bible. Protestantism of today is an empty shell, it has nothing. But, back then, in 1912, they believed the Bible. Crowley, then, exposed many things, and one of the things he exposed, that helped me with this, was that he warned that the Jesuits, with their Knights of Columbus, which, he says, the Knights of Columbus, named after Columbus, who he tells us was a Spanish Jew and a pirate and a deflower of young girls, that Columbus was no Christian. He has a tremendous section in his book on Columbus. That the purpose of the Knights of Columbus was to fulfill Jesuitical politics, and part of those politics was to restore the temporal power of the Pope because, you remember, the Pope had lost that in 1870 and they wanted to get it back. And they got it back with Mussolini in 1929. Well, in the book that Crowley wrote in 1912, he says that Taft and Teddy Roosevelt were all kowtowing to the Pope and the Cardinals of New York. And he said they were going to use our military to restore the Pope's temporal power around the world. And that was absolutely correct. That is American foreign policy. And the Council of Trent is the American foreign policy of today. That's what's going on in Serbia and Bosnia. It is the Council of Trent, the Jesuits using the American Air Force to bomb those Orthodox people to smithereens. But that was Crowley's great contribution. Next, Emmett McLaughlin wrote several books. He wrote The People's Padre. He wrote Crime and Immorality in the Catholic Church, showing that Catholic nations are more lawless and more criminal than Protestant nations, and he proved it with statistics from the jails. Emmett McLaughlin also wrote another book called The Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, where he, again, shows that Lincoln was assassinated by the Jesuits. So, Emmett McLaughlin came out of the Catholic Church. To my knowledge, he never was born again. He never was saved, but he did tell the truth. He married a nun, and lived a virtuous and honorable life after he left. The last one was, of course, Alberto Rivera, who was greatly hated by the Vatican, because he was a very high Jesuit who came out and, in the late 60s, about 1969, exposed the power of Rome in the ecumenical movement, that Rome controlled Catherine Kuhlman, that Rome controlled Billy Graham, that Rome controlled, virtually, our government. Ronald Reagan. Reagan, when he took the oath of office, faced the obelisk, indicating that this country will ultimately have a concordat. So, Alberto Rivera converted to Christ, wonderfully, and he started a ministry called the Antichrist Information Center, out of Los Angeles. They tried to kill him 5 times. A dentist jammed a needle up between his teeth, trying to give him an infection in the brain. When he passed out, about a year or so later, they couldn't figure it out. Everybody was praying for him. And this was discovered when he went to another dentist. He had it removed. He was pushed in front of a subway train. They tried 5 times to kill the man, and finally he died, I believe, of cancer, in a hospital, about 3 years ago. But these 4 wonderful, great, Catholic priests did their best to expose the power of Rome and its attempts to destroy our sovereign, Protestant, Bible-believing nation. And so, to them, I dedicate it. Martin, what compelled you to write this book? What started it for you? Phelps, I was always taught to be a patriot first and foremost. America first, and everybody else second. Later, when I came to know the Lord, at 17, I realized the Bible taught the same thing, that the Lord had instituted nations. The Lord never instituted world governments, that's always the result of the devil's working. So, being a patriot and a nationalist believing in national sovereignty, I was saved at 17, went into the Air Force, was garrisoned in a nuclear weapons area for 3 years in Germany, came back and started to go to Bible college. When I went to Bible college, the issue of the King James came up, as far as it being an archaic version. And that's what I used, and I had never given it a thought. Well, some were using NIV, some NASB, and I thought, well, maybe it's just a modern version of what I have here? And I thought, well, if they want to use that's fine, but I'll use the King James. I found that the underlying Greek text for the King James, the Textus Receptus, was the Greek text of the Reformation. It represents 95% of the existing manuscripts that we have today. The Greek text that underlies all these other versions, there's a Westcott and Hort Greek text, which I then discovered was really a conspiracy to adulterate the Textus Receptus in England, led by Brooke Foss Westcott and Anthony Hort, who were Marioliters, Mary worshippers. Later, I found out that they had invited Cardinal Newman to sit in on the revision committee. Well, Cardinal Newman was a traitor to the Anglican Church, with his Tract 90, which blew off the Anglican Church. He then left England and he was then a cardinal by Pius IX. So, here we have Cardinal Newman, and E.B. Pusey, had been invited to sit on this revision committee, the end result being a Greek text that had been produced that was pro-Jerome's Latin Vulgate. Jerome's Latin Vulgate is the basis for the Jesuits' Reims D text, that was put out in 1582, that was attempting to rival William Tyndale's English text, which later became the King James Version of 1611. So now I see this awful Jesuit hand in my Bible college, attempting to deprive me of the Word of God, the authorized version of 1611, in its present edition of 1769. Now I thought, well, here the Jesuits are, what else have they done? And the next thing I was led to was the Lincoln assassination. And I can remember reading Burke McCarty's The Suppressed Truth about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and weeping in the back room, when I was in college. Martin, for me, one of the most compelling portions of your book was the series of revelations about Lincoln. I was stunned by that. Phelps, that's what they did. Remember, Lincoln was not going to go along with the 14th Amendment. He wanted those southern states to re-enter the Union on the same footing that they had left, which would have left us with a federal republic, as Washington had established it. This the Jesuits would not allow. It would be converted into an empire. The states would be subordinate provinces to Washington. And the 14th Amendment would accomplish this with the reversion of citizenship. And Lincoln was re-elected, and he was ready to end this, and that's why they killed him. Kennedy was ready to implement his things, they would not let him be re-elected. Martin, this is a total aside. Have you ever come across the Jefferson Bible? Phelps, the Jefferson Bible, and maybe you know this is Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And Thomas Jefferson, being the deist, being the pagan that he was, cut out all the supernatural from those three Gospels. Jefferson was a deist, he was involved with the French Freemasons, who were involved in the French Revolution, and he was not here at the writing of our Protestant Constitution. So, the Lord put him out of the picture. Jefferson was just used to help with the revolution, because the Lord does use the ungodly for good things. But Jefferson copied much of the Declaration of Independence from the Mecklenburg Declaration, written by Calvinistic Presbyterians of North Carolina, when they seceded, when that county of Mecklenburg seceded from the colonies. Martin, never heard of it. Phelps, yes, you'll find it in Presbyterian writings. You can find it from D. James Kennedy, he has a thing on it. And Jefferson copied, at the end, and to this end we devote our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor? That was copied directly from the Mecklenburg Declaration. Jefferson was a plagiarist, he was a high Freemason, and he was out of here at the time of the writing of our Constitution. And the reason why the people of Virginia did elect him to office was because he was a states' rights man. He wanted limited powers in Washington, and that was a good thing. And when Jefferson was elected, he undid everything the King President John Adams did with his alien and sedition laws, because John Adams wanted to be a king, and Jefferson undid it, and Jefferson got 2 terms for that. Martin, I am looking at some things that are a little further back now. The Secret Moneta. What is the significance of that? Phelps, the secret instructions excerpts at the end of this interview are the handbooks that are given to the professed Jesuits, those under extreme oath. The oath is presented in full at the end of this interview. And it tells them how to conduct their plans, subjugating peoples and nations to the Jesuit general, and thus, to the temporal power of the Pope. It tells how they are to deceive. It shows how they are to swindle rich widows out of their fortunes, like they did with Astor's second wife, who survived the Titanic catastrophe. It shows their general approach on how to do things. This particular book cannot be known, and if it is ever published, they will deny its existence. But when you see the works that the Jesuits have done, it is in complete agreement with the Secret Moneta. There is a very interesting section in Edwin R. Sherwin's book The Engineer Corps of Hell, written in 1886, I believe, another suppressed work. It is usually in the archives of all the older libraries back here. And he shows how the Secret Moneta was discovered in South America by a Mason, and the Mason managed to escape to a lodge after being shot. He turned the Secret Moneta over to the lodge, and then these certain Freemasons saw the Secret Moneta. There are certain low-level Freemasons who believe that the Jesuit order is their enemy, so that's why it was taken to the lodge and then published. But the high-level Masons, of course, work with them. The Secret Moneta was discovered once that way. It was published in Holland. Then, in 1857, reprinted by England. Martin, Pascal's provincial letters had a devastating impact on exposing the Jesuits. Why? Phelps, Blaise Pascal was a Huguenot, a French Calvinist. So here we have another fearless man. He doesn't fear death, he is going to tell the truth. So Blaise Pascal wrote a series of letters that were written to and from provincials, and he wrote them in a satirical manner that of course excited that wonderful French mind. The French, of course, came to the conclusion that this was absolutely the truth, and then they moved to suppress the Jesuits again. But his provincial letters are considered a classic. Blaise Pascal also wrote some other great works, too. Martin, Pope Gangley Clement XVI abolished the order entirely in 1773, and was murdered as a result. Phelps, correct, he was poisoned. Martin, the order was similarly abolished 39 times from different kingdoms throughout Europe. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that something was terribly wrong with this group. Phelps, right. Are all those people bigots? Are all those people brainwashed bigots and fanatical Protestants who abolished the Jesuit order? You find the greatest resistance to the Jesuits in Catholic countries by Catholic monarchs. And that is why the Roman Catholic monarchs and nobility of today don't dare resist them. The Kennedys won't touch them. The monarchs of Europe won't touch them. The Habsburgs won't touch them, because the Jesuits have vindicated their power in the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. Well, then they went to suppress the Jesuits again in Europe, and they were, for the most part, kicked out of Europe in the 1800s. All the nations of Europe banned them. Germany banned them in 1872. And so, World War I and II, the Second 30 Years' War, was payback for this. And ever since then, nobody touches them. Pope Gangnuli abolished the Jesuits with a papal bull. The Jesuits call it a brief. It is not a brief, it is in the library of the bulls, and it is called Dominic AC Redemptor Naster. That is the name of a bull. And when he abolished them forever, that they were not to talk about their abolition, that they were not to teach. He confiscated all of their wealth and land and property. For the most part, the Dominicans took it over, which is why the Dominicans had their penis cut off during the French Revolution. That is what the Jacobins did to them. It was payback by the Jesuits. You don't dare take our property from us, boy. And you don't dare take Inquisition from us? Jacobins killed nearly every Dominican in France. Martin, why was the assassination of William of Orange so significant? Phelps, William of Orange was the father of religious liberty. William of Orange is the man who gave the Jews the freedom to come to Amsterdam. And the Jews called Amsterdam the New Jerusalem. William of Orange was a Catholic to begin with. Remember when he was in the forest, hunting with the King of France, and the King of France laid bare to him their plans to destroy all the Protestants in Holland. William kept silent. And that's why he was called William the Taciturn? Or William the Silent. So, he harbored all of this in his heart, and he went back to Holland determined that he would deliver the Calvinists and the Protestants from this annihilation. William went to Germany with his German wife, and he, according to Motley in his The Dutch Republic, raised an army of Germans, and they did not succeed in liberating Holland. And so, it was the Dutch themselves who joined William of Orange in an attempt to liberate the country, which they ultimately did as the wild beggars of the sea. So, William was a great inspiration. He delivered flight from the siege of the fanatical Roman Catholic Spanish, led by the Jesuits, when the Lord providentially delivered and sent a strong wind over the dikes, and flooded the whole area, and flooded the Spanish soldiers. And then, after that happened, he sent another strong west wind and blew the water back over the dikes. This is a historical fact. Why don't we hear this in history? For the same reason we don't hear, when Louis XVI brought his army across the river into Holland, to kill all those Dutch, in 1672, right around there, that the river, right where the army was crossing, thawed out, and the whole French army went to the bottom of the river, as a result of the prayers of those Protestants of Holland. We were not taught that either. The assassination of William of Orange was probably the second most significant act of Jesuit dominance, next to the murder of Coligny at St. Bartholomew's Massacre. Because it was first St. Bartholomew's Massacre, and then the murder of William of Orange. And, of course, William of Orange was shot by a Jesuit-controlled assassin, Balthazar Gerard, in his own house. And the last words of William, of course, were, "God be merciful to these poor people?" Martin, what is the Royal Institute of International Affairs? Phelps, the Royal Institute of International Affairs is the same as the American Council on Foreign Relations CFR. The Royal Institute runs England and the British Empire, what was once the extension of the British, just as the CFR runs our country. They are sister organizations. Martin, where are they based? Phelps, they are based in London. Martin, and who is their head, do you know? Phelps, I don't know right now. The John Birch Society wrote a lot about that, and they did expose the CFR and the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Alan Stang has written a lot about that. Martin, what was the gunpowder plot of 1605? Phelps, the gunpowder plot of 1605 was the Jesuits' attempt to destroy William Howitt, and Howitt was the great writer who wrote a popular history of priestcraft, 1835. He said it was a Jesuit attempt to destroy our great King Solomon, King James I, along with the entire Protestant Parliament. Because remember, Elizabeth I had expelled the Jesuits from her empire, and if they were ever caught they were to be drawn and quartered. After she died, the conspiracy went on there that went on with William Cecil, They named Mary Queen of Scots' son as the King of England, rather than Elizabeth's son, because Elizabeth had a son who was the Earl of Southampton, Wriothesley, and that was the son of Edward de Vere, who we know as William Shakespeare. There was no William Shakespeare. The man was Edward de Vere. He ran the Globe Theatre. He was the Lord Great Chamberlain to Queen Elizabeth, and he secretly had a son who was the third Earl of Southampton. He was the rightful heir to the throne, not King James VI of Scotland. You can find all this documented in two great works. The first is called Shakespeare Identified and the author is Looney. The explosion of that book is called The Star of England, written by Carleton and Dorothy Ogburn, in 1952, and it is a 1,200-page work, and in it they explain all the plays of Shakespeare, and that they are, in the words of Hanlow, a brief abstract and chronicle of the times. Nothing but history. And then there's another book, Wasn't He Shakespeare Someone Else, written by Tweeny, and in that book he evaluates the 150 sonnets. In those sonnets Edward de Vere put his name, Vere or Ouvre or Vere, he puts his name in acrostics throughout all the sonnets. And the last couple sonnets he puts his name in double acrostics. It is amazing, showing that he wrote the sonnets. Martin, why were the Jesuits so upset about the Edict of Nantes, and what was its significance? Phelps, okay, the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, it can be spelled Nantes or Nantes. Anyway, the Edict of Nantes was put forward by King Henry IV. King Henry IV was a Roman Catholic, but he converted to Protestantism and he became a Huguenot. But he was not allowed to take the throne of France until he renounced his Protestantism. So, for the sake of the kingdom, he renounced his Protestantism, and in 1610, I believe, issued forth the Edict of Nantes. The Edict of Nantes guaranteed religious freedom to all the French. That included the Protestant, Calvinist, Huguenots, which of course included those who would have followed Admiral Coligny, who the Jesuits murdered with that she-wolf, Catherine de' Medici. With the Edict of Nantes we have religious liberty in France. This cannot be. France is a cornerstone of Jesuit power, so it cannot allow this to be in place. The Council of Trent condemns it, because it is freedom of conscience. So, after they murder Henry IV with Ravaillac, when they stabbed him through his heart, according to Sully in his memoirs, they murdered Henry IV for this, and also for attempting to reinforce the Dutch. They then, in 1685, when the Beatles are singing about the Sunday King, in their White Album, they re-singing about Louis XVI. And that is telling you that the Beatles are Jesuit-controlled. The Sunday King, Louis XVI, who reigned, who rules over France for, I believe, 60 years, he, because of his Jesuit confessor, Père Lachaise, revokes the Edict of Nantes, and with that, no more religious freedom in France. And then they sent their French dragons out and beheaded, and killed every Huguenot they could find, driving 500,000 Frenchmen out of the country, the wealth of France, the manhood of France, all left for Holland and England. That destroyed France. From then on, France became a nothing nation. The French Revolution could never have happened had not the revocation of the Edict of Nantes taken place. Because now, there's no Bible in France. And to this day, the French have never published a French version of the Textus Receptus. Number 1. All French Bibles have been produced in foreign countries. When they've been translated from the Greek Textus Receptus into French, France has never done it. That shows the Jesuit power over France to this day. And the French have probably been the most manly, the strongest, the most gracious, the most determined in kicking the Jesuits out of their country. They've kicked them out, to my knowledge, 3 times, and again, they come back, foment wars, kill off the rulers, etc. Drive Eugene Sue into exile, he dies of a broken heart. Drive Calvin into exile, he can never return to France. All the great Frenchmen are driven into exile. So we have, as American patriots, we have a great camaraderie for the French. They helped us in our American Revolution. And why did they help us? Because they've been expelled from France. Why did Spain help us? Why did they help finance our revolution? The Jesuits had been expelled from Spain. So payback came for Spain and France, for helping this heretic, Protestant nation come into existence, with the Napoleonic Wars, when they killed Louis XVI and drove the Bourbons from the Spanish throne. That was payback. Martin, for 30 years of war, from 1618-1648, you state that the Jesuits, through Ferdinand II, killed off 10 million people. That's quite a statement. Phelps, that statement comes from Redpath's History of the World, published in 1899. And that is high.